as you heard, my name is Elena Raviola, and I would like to talk today about what's called entrepreneurial journalism. And in particular, I will link to my current research on journalists that become entrepreneurs, and try to take up a few questions, a few issues that are raising in this new sort of area or new category of society. So I'll try to share my slides. Let me just see, we tried before, so here it goes. So you should be able to see my presentation. Let's see if I can make the presentation mode. Yes. So entrepreneurial journalism between technology, journalism, and business. So as Sarah said, I came to Sweden when I was a doctoral student, and I started working in a research center on media companies. So I have been working for a few years on media companies and media, sort of the media industries. And this story about entrepreneurial journalism really sort of comes from this interest of mine in media industries, and in particular, I mean, on the wide scale, on the relationship between media and democracy. But my entrance into this has been how media are organized, and in particular how journalism is organized, and how it is sort of affected by digital technologies. So I came into this I bumped into this entrepreneurial journalism from two sides. The first side was that when I was writing my dissertation, many years ago, I started 15 years ago. So when I started that work, the newspaper industry especially was quite gloomy. So there were titles like this. Who killed the newspaper? There was, this idea that the newspaper will die, so there will be a date, and there has been different predictions on the date where the last newspaper copy would be published. It was very gloomy, and the gloominess of a newspaper was usually ascribed to the internet, to the rise of what's called the internet. And this is interesting because at that time, really in the industry, there was this sort of call for, change or die. I remember a newspaper industry conference in Gothenburg, actually, where the motto was, I think it was literally change or die. So this was sort of one side. I wrote my dissertation on a newspaper, on a newspaper in particular. I spent 6 months at a newspaper newsroom and try to understand sort of the shift with digitalization. And the atmosphere was quite, not depressing maybe, but quite sort of on the fading zone, we will die. On the other side, I've also been interested in a sort of automation and robotization and this kind of things that are very popular nowadays. On that sort of side, I've had encountered a fear from the media, and especially from the journalistic profession, that robots will automate and will sort of take our jobs. So there has been a lot of sort of threat, a lot of sort of crying out for the Pulitzer being stolen by a robot. And even in Sweden a couple of years ago, there was this Stora journalistpris that was given to a robot developed by a news agency. So there has been this sort of the gloominess of the newspaper industry going down, and also sort of the gloominess of this automation taking over all the journalistic work. And also to lift up, what is the consequences for democracy if democracy is automatized, and also the sort of the watch role is automatized. So in the midst of all this gloominess, what I found is that, well, actually, if you look at this industry from another side, there was a lot of energy and a lot of new ideas, a lot of sort of experiments in trying out new ways of making news, new ways of distributing news, new ways of simply organizing the journalistic work. So while a lot of journalists have been fired and have lost their jobs, so the amount of sort of journalists that are actually former employees and maybe former journalists is increasing. What's also increases is the number of journalists that are trying to start new businesses and to create sort of opportunities, new business opportunities and new sort of ways of making things in the journalism sphere. So I started following robots a couple of years ago. I received a grant from the Swedish Research Council for a project called robotization of professional work, where we try to follow robots or automation in two fields: healthcare, which is a classical professional field with doctors and nurses and all that, and in the journalism field. So I started following robots, and what I ended up with was entrepreneurs. Perhaps it was also a matter of that I was getting quite bored with like being in established media companies and seeing the newsroom basically organized in the same way since many years. So I ended up and I looked for entrepreneurs and these sort of maybe interstices between different fields that come together and make things in new ways. So today I would like to tell you a little bit about these entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurial journalism is the label that has been sort of floating around in the journalism field and in the news field for about 15 years. And it refers to an increasing number of journalists that have left the newspaper, most of them, but I mean, not necessarily a newspaper, but many of them that are sort of considered entrepreneurial journalists nowadays were working for established media companies. So these journalists have left and have been overflowing from these established businesses and have become entrepreneurs. Also, it refers to, on the other side, technology entrepreneurs that have become interested in the journalistic field. And a lot of times it's about technology. It's about sort of finding new ways of doing journalism and also doing business where new technologies play a very big role. And it used to be new technologies like what we called the web, I mean in general terms, and it has been increasingly new technologies as in AI and different sort of machine learning techniques to do different things. So apart from the technological innovations, what really has fascinated me are the many experiments in organizing journalism. So what I think it's really fascinating is not only sort of the new technological possibilities, but is what the technological possibilities bring with them, with themselves. And that means for me, sort of imagining new ways of organizing journalism, new structures and new relations. So I would like to just briefly talk about three forms of these new ways of organizing journalism that I'm following. The first one that I will talk on is a platform, a new platform for journalism, and it's really an entrepreneurial story. The second one, it's also an entrepreneurial story of another sort of kind, and it's a new model that builds on temporality. So on sort of organizing a temporary newsroom, which is a very sort of new idea, because we have imagined newsrooms as permanent creatures. And then the third type of these experiments is what I call the technology company that has moved into some sort of relevance in journalism and news. So the first one, and I'm talking about these three because these three have become the object of my study in this project about robotizing professional work. So the first one is the platform, and I'm following a Swedish platform which is called Gazin at the address gazin.com. And Gazin's idea is really quite simple. Gazin offers itself as a platform for freelance journalists, especially for feature content, for feature magazine content. And Gazin's idea is, in very short terms, to become the Spotify for freelance journalists. So this is how they present themselves. Gazin, it's your story, that's their logo, and that's their motto. And they describe themselves as Gazin is a premium platform where readers can find all the content they want in one place. Journalists, on the other hand, can keep the rights to their content and monetize it over time. And best of all, have their article translated and spread to the rest of the world. Our goal is to disrupt the global market for magazines. So this is from Gazin's pitch deck, what Gazin says to potential investors. What's interesting here is that Gazin's, so with this idea of becoming a Spotify for journalists, tries to offer a platform to disrupt the classical magazine industry. This is what it looks like at the moment, and as you can see here, there's also a beta version. This is a beta version, so there is another version of the website that is being developed, developed right now. And the entrepreneurial idea of Gazin, then, it's quite simple. It started from really the idea of an entrepreneur that was very knowledgeable about the media industry, and seeing the sort of exploitation of freelance journalists. So the fact that these freelance journalists that are sort of need to sign a contract with big publishers and end up in this, what in Swedish has been called fyllavtal, where they write these articles, they give up their copyright and the publication, all the publication rights. So they're paid once, and the publishers can publish these pieces how many times they want, and they're only paid once. So there is this sort of idea that this is unjust. And so Gazins come in with the idea, we want to sort of give justice to this. So the idea is to allow these freelance journalists to publish their articles on the platform and to keep the copyright and simply offer the technology. So basically, there's no publisher in Gazin, there's only the platform. So it's mainly a technology company, you would say, given by the platform. The idea is also that the remuneration of the journalists would be made on the basis of the most read article or the most relevant article, with the idea to develop some sort of just remuneration on the basis of technology. So to inscribe into technology some sort of just remuneration. So the idea is to not only that the remuneration should be sort of adjusted and distributed by technology, also automatically, but also the very publication should heavily rely on automation in the long run. At the moment, not very many things are automated, so everything that is published is actually manually checked and manually edited, and all this. And also the entrepreneurial idea has been from the beginning that this will be only one side of the business, and the idea has been to try and find new areas in which the journalistic expertise might be valuable. That also means that might be sold and compensated in other ways. So, for example, are there possible trainings, possible sort of like courses that could be developed, or other sort of content production activities. And that was the initial idea. Now this kind of other business has been quite challenged because the investors have sort of pushed this business to focus on the actual journalism activities. And that's interesting because that's also where usually the money possibilities and the monetization possibilities are really challenged. So the story is that this woman called Anna Holmqvist, which was the also head of Familjeliv in the end of the 90s and beginning of 2000. So she has a sort of expertise in this world. She's educated as a journalist, but she has also worked as a media manager, and she worked at a media technology company called Strosso. So at the end of 2018, she came up with this idea, and she, on another platform, on a sort of technology outsourcing platform, she contacted a freelance developer, I think living in Ukraine or something like this, and she sort of asked him to develop a first idea, a first sort of a draft of a first attempt, a prototype of this platform. And she launched this platform that became public in 2019, at the very beginning of 2019. And she was doing this as she was working at Strosso. When she was looking around and she talked to her manager and also to the publishers, to the big publishers, everybody was like supportive of this idea. But nobody wanted to take it. Nobody wanted to do it himself or herself. But she received, she received like support, at least moral support from this idea. So she decided to leave the company and to start this website. The website was started without a company attached to it. So it was just her, and she worked on recruiting journalists that were going to publish things for free at the beginning on this platform. In June 2019, also an experienced technologist came on board, and this was a technologist that had worked in the US and had just moved to Sweden, and he started working with this company and working on sort of going from the Ukrainian developer to internalizing the technology development. In the fall 2019, at the end of the fall, they started a company. So they hadn't formally any company. They had sort of private, their sort of egenföretag, the private enterprises, but they didn't have a company that was called Gazin, because they thought that they didn't need it at that point. But even before they started this company, they won a place at the Stockholm incubator scheme. So they start sitting there and they receive different kinds of coaching, and then they started also looking for financing for investors, which they haven't really been able to. They are sort of right now they are looking for money. They are doing this fundraising job. So they received the funding also in the spring 2020 from Vinnova, and also they received some funding from the incubator's sort of venture capital branch. And with this money, they recruited people. So they hired a junior editorial person, and they hired a junior technologist. So they're trying to build up. And the trick here is that they are caught into, they need to develop technology, but at the same time they have little money, but they have a very big network. So there are more than 200 freelance journalists that have signed up on Gazin, which means that they produce content for free for Gazin, because at the moment there is no income involved for. They are trying to project the possibility to have a paywall, but they haven't really put that in place. So this has sort of interested me because it seems a very simple idea. So what's the news here? So it's a platform, and it's in a way close to sort of a self-publishing platform, right? But it's not quite a simple idea in practice, because there are lots of new dilemmas that come up. For example, one of the most difficult things is that Gazin needs to juggle between the journalists and the public. Both of them become markets for Gazin, for the platform that is in the middle. Like Spotify has the market of artists and the market of listeners. And double market has been referred especially to in the media industry as the advertising market and the public, the audience. But in this case, really the journalists become a market for which Gazin has to work to attract and to take a share of that market. And that requires particular work that usually traditional media companies don't really do. And this is a work of persuasion and trying to be on board and also market to sort of spread the idea to become ambassador, etc. The other question that comes up is that this is not only entrepreneurial on the side of Gazin itself, but Gazin also encourages all the journalists to be entrepreneurial in the sense of sort of spreading their own articles and markets themselves on social media and sort of do that work that usually journalists don't do or didn't need to do. Another challenge is that this comes up with a new category of business. So it's quite difficult to sort of be placed in a given category, and that means also that it makes it more difficult to access certain kind of money. Not in the private sphere, but for example, the public financing that is available for media company has some sort of requirements. For example, the need to have a publisher that is responsible for what is published that Gazin doesn't have. So even when the state has established an explicit fund for media innovation, this very simple idea that brings this media innovation doesn't fit within that category, so cannot get access to this financing. And the challenge is also to try to count and to explain to different people what is the value of this business, not only for potential investors, but also for potential contributors. So on this market of journalists that need to be persuaded to be on board. So there are sort of new questions, and I will try to sum up at the end some of the questions that I think are most interesting and burning here. So this is one case. The other case that I think it's sort of emerging is different temporary solutions or different sort of temporary organizations or projects around news production. And one of them that I followed, it's called the Pop-Up Newsroom. The Pop-Up Newsroom, this was one of the Twitter sort of account of the Pop-Up Newsroom when I came to Sweden. The Pop-Up Newsroom is a traveling project for setting up temporary and collaborative newsrooms in different countries around elections. So it started in 2016 with the American elections when Trump was elected. And at that point, it was called Election Land. And two entrepreneurs and few more people set up a collaboration, a nationwide collaboration that included a lot of people, 1,000 people, where universities collaborated with established media and also new small startup and technology companies and NGOs and fact-checking organizations to set up a mega newsroom that was working for one day, the day of the election, to check to verify news on social media feeds. So it was like a fact checking and so social news verification enterprise, especially against fake news, misinformation, and disinformation. So then, with this sort of successful idea, these two people, one from a technology organization called Check in San Francisco, and another one, a freelance sort of journalist consultant, took this idea. They made it into a logo. They packaged it into an idea, and they started exporting these ideas in different countries. So, for example, they brought it in France. They were active during the also in the UK during the elections. They were active in India, and the most successful project was probably in Mexico during the Mexican elections in 2018 with a project called Verificado, when also established media organizations were part of, like Al Jazeera, for example. So what's difficult with this enterprise is the financing, and basically here the financing model is a model of almost like a charity, or a model like a research funding model. They usually look for separate financing from tech giants, and in particular the branches of tech giants that are devoted to saving the news field and journalism, like Google News Initiative and Facebook Journalism Project. And this is not without irony. And then this idea, so they worked on this idea for almost 4 years. And then last year they tried to put together a whole project for US. They didn't manage to get financing, so this idea faded around, and these people that really drove this idea, they went onto other projects. So this was not only temporary in the sense that it was temporary newsrooms that were ephemeral, but also the very idea sort of lost its time. So the new challenges of this idea were that it was not that easy always to get collaboration and these temporary collaborations in each countries because of the competition between media companies and this idea that they should have exclusivity. Also, the difficulties was to translate a global model, build on what's called design thinking, and also build on given technological steps. The model wanted to be local, but had quite important global or standardized constraints. The challenge was also in this financing and scaling up. So the project needed a certain amount of financing to go on. It was also built in with universities, so the university needed not that much financing, and it was built on sort of free labors from students and others. But it was a challenge to sort of scale up and make it a big project. So really it was needed sort of the traditional media companies collaboration for this. It was also probably a project that was based on this sort of wave of fake news and a little bit of trend of post-truth society that has come up with fake news and all these ideas. But then, so my hint is that this has probably faded, and a lot of other fact-checking organizations have developed. So the need for this project, for such a project, has faded along the way. The last sort of new model that I want to talk about in this media entrepreneurial sphere is what I call the technology company, which is basically the idea that there are some technology companies that are technology companies but make themselves relevant also in the editorial business, and they are active as media companies. And in particular, I follow one company that is called Logically, which is a UK-based company financed, started by a technologist, a very young technologist and engineer from MIT. They received also funding very generous funding from MIT. This company's main idea has been to use AI, in particular machine learning, to detect and to fight against misinformation and disinformation. So it also started in this wave of this fake news sort of trend. And the company, I call it a technology company because from the beginning it had a very clear idea that this is about news. But the composition of the of the people that were hired for this company was that probably 90% of the people in the company are experts in technology, and there is a small editorial team that feed like editorial competence into developing the technology, because the idea was to completely automate the detection of misinformation and disinformation. It turned out to be more difficult than it looked like at the beginning, but the company survives and has developed sort of other sorts of businesses, and also has made itself relevant for other sectors than the news sectors. So my claim is that there is a sort of an established way to organize journalism, and also there is this threat and this gloomy idea that the traditional media companies are sort of losing money, and the journalists are losing their jobs and they are paid less, etc. And it's becoming much more and more copy and paste journalism. But there also, if we look at the same industry from another angle, there's also a lot of entrepreneurial ferment that has transformed the media industry from a mature industry to like a reborn industry at the boundaries between journalism, technology, and making business. So is entrepreneurial journalism about entrepreneurial democracy? I mean, that's an open question that I'm not sure I can answer, but what I can say is that in this sphere, there is a lot of sort of renegotiation of boundaries, a lot of organizational boundaries that are renegotiated, who is inside and who is outside, and which organizations are involved. And so while before we knew that, okay, so the news that are made in the newspaper are made by this journalist, and these are sitting here. In this sort of new world, there are a lot of boundaries that are so blurring. There is also a very big standardizing role driven by technology. So these technologies bring with themselves ideas, global ideas of how things should be organized, like the idea of a platform. But also very practically, they constrains the way news are, for example, made, but also the way in which, for example, fake news are automatically detected and all, and these kind of things. There is also this thing which is interesting for this idea of entrepreneurial democracy, which is that there are important power shifts in the field. So while we consider the news field as made by media companies before, the tech giant have very dominantly got their feet into this field. So this field has not only been shaped by the search engines like Google, but also social media like Facebook, in attracting audience and selling advertising. So they have often been accused of stealing advertising from the established media companies. But at this point, they are also financing innovation in this media field. And the traditional media companies at the new startup, they welcome this financing in short of other financing. So there are quite sort of ironic relations that are developed in this field. And finally, the big question, for me at least, is that if this whole thing means that independence and media independence and media's role in democracy is changing and needs to be reframed, do we need to sort of reinterpret what independence means and what the relationship between journalism and business means, which means that at the same time we probably need to re-educate and reschool journalists, but also entrepreneurs and business people to come together to think about the bigger picture.